you guys, me again, Flickers of Fear time. Got a really weird one for you today. Finally getting around to doing some Terry Gilliam. I don't think we've actually talked about any Terry Gilliam movies on any of our shows, which we really need to rectify. Maybe we should at least do... Maybe we did Brazil. I can't remember. But we definitely need to do Time Bandits, because that's actually my favorite Terry Gilliam movie. But this one right here is his 2005 film, Tideland. Now, it's really interesting. If you guys remember a while back when I reviewed the 1990 weird-ass movie, The Reflecting Skin, and when I was reviewing that, Tideland gets compared to The Reflecting Skin sometimes, so much so that if you look at the Tideland Wikipedia page, it actually has, like in the other sources kind of section at the bottom, it even has a link to the movie The Reflecting Skin, because the themes of them are similar. So when I was going to do the review on The Reflecting Skin, which I watched on Tubi, I noticed that Tubi also had Tideland. So I was like, oh man, I should do that because that's Terry Gilliam and that's one of the few movies of his that I haven't seen. So I put it on the list to do, and I finally got around to watching it. So this was actually my first viewing of this movie. Like I said, I've seen most of his other movies several times, but I had never seen this one. I apparently just like kind of forgot it existed until I was doing the Reflecting Skin review. But I'm glad I finally got around to watching it. Now, this movie, when it came out, and I didn't actually remember this movie got really, really wildly divergent critic reviews. A lot of critics really despised it. I mean, so much so that I think it was Richard Roper that said something like, I hated this movie. It's like I was going to walk out of the screening, and I never do that. And some just people said it was awful, and it was just like this kind of creepy and exploitative and all of this other stuff. But then, on the other hand, when it played at like some festivals and stuff, it actually got a lot of accolades. So this is definitely one of those movies that you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. Now, if you're into Terry Gilliam, I don't see any reason why this would offend you in any way. If you're not into Terry Gilliam, this might be like what the fuck did I just watch kind of situation. This is a little bit different than some of his other movies, but it does have a lot of his hallmarks in it. Like there's like a lot of surrealism and things of that nature. Now, I will not lie, this is kind of a difficult movie to watch, and there's like a lot of disturbing shit in it. But I think the reason maybe that a lot of critics hated it was because I'm not going to say I don't think they got what he was trying to do, but I think they were looking at the movie from the wrong perspective, maybe. And I'll kind of get into that in a bit. So I guess what had happened prior to this was that Terry Gilliam had been trying to make The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. I think they kind of got into the production, and then they had like a lot of issues with it. No one's fault. It was just kind of like nature, flooding and things like that kind of fucked up the thing. And I think there were so many of those things happening that the production eventually ended up getting canceled, after which Terry Gilliam then went on to work on The Brothers Grimm, which was kind of a bigger budget, like studio film. And apparently he didn't have like a real good experience with that. He felt like it didn't really come out the way he wanted. He had a lot of control that was taken away and things of that nature. So I guess with Tideland, he basically wanted to make something completely independently, and he just wanted to do exactly what he wanted. And that's pretty much exactly what he did. So this was a British-Canadian co-production, and they actually shot it in Saskatchewan. And then it played at some festivals. It did really well in Europe, it seemed like. And actually, the only country, weirdly, I don't know why this is, the only country, weirdly, where this was like a box office success was Japan. Now, the reason it only got a very, very limited theatrical release in the U.S., I guess Think Film, that distribution company, picked it up for a U.S. release, but then for whatever reason only showed it at like 9 theaters. I think that was the most in the whole entire country. That was the most it ever played at. So it made something like $60,000 because they just like botched the distribution. Terry Gilliam was kind of pissed off about it. And like I said, even most of the critics that saw it really, really seemed to hate it. And like I said, everybody has their own opinion about shit. I kind of feel like this movie maybe is in kind of maybe the same boat as maybe Lars von Trier, people like that, where they're making movies that maybe are, skirting some kind of uncomfortable issues, and some people don't really like that or don't like the way that he's approaching it. Let's put it that way. So I can see why people maybe didn't like it, but I think they were just maybe looking at it from a perspective that maybe he didn't intend. So, we'll get into that. So this is actually based on a novel by Mitch Cullen. Now, interestingly, the author of the novel was a huge fan of Terry Gilliam. And before the book was published, he apparently sent like an ARC, like an early copy to Terry Gilliam, not like for him to make it into a movie, but because he just wanted like an endorsement or like a quote that he could put on the cover or something like that. But Terry Gilliam liked the book so much that he's like, well, shit, I'm going to make a movie. This is going to be my next movie. So that's what he ended up doing. So the story of Tideland. This is about a little girl named Jeliza Rose. And she lives with her two junkie parents, played by Jeff Bridges and Jennifer Tilly. They are both heroin addicts. And very early on in the movie, her mom dies of an overdose. And her dad, whose name is Noah, decides that he's going to take her on a journey. He has this thing where he wants to go to Jutland. The interesting thing about this movie is that Jeliza Rose's entire worldview has been shaped by her parents, who are neglectful, not outright abusive, although I would argue that her mom is probably like emotionally abusive, because one minute she's like, I love you, and then the next minute she's like, what did I say about eating my chocolate, you little bitch? It was like, it's that kind of thing. So, it's not a good situation. But the dad has kind of like all of these fantasies about things he's going to do. So I feel like the daughter, since this is the only life she's ever known, has kind of grown up around this and is kind of like bought into this sort of fantasy world to an extent. So after the mom dies, Noah and the daughter kind of have to go on the run because they don't want to, they don't want to get caught because of, drugs and whatnot. So they end up getting on a bus and going back to Noah's mother's house, which is kind of this, creaky old abandoned house, like out in the middle of the prairie. I think it's supposed to be in Texas, but like I said, they filmed it in Saskatchewan. And this is very much where the similarities between this movie and The Reflecting Skin come in, because you have these massive wheat fields. They might have been like even shot around the same area. I'm not entirely sure. But these massive wheat fields with like these kind of like creepy abandoned houses. And I think there's another thematic kind of similarity too, because in The Reflecting Skin, if you'll remember, all of these kind of tragic things ensue kind of based on one child's perception of the neighbor as a vampire. This is kind of a similar sort of story, but not quite as dire as that. This is almost kind of like the flip side of that, because Jeliza Rose's character lives in this horrific, like from an adult point of view, the life that she lives is horrific. Like no child should have to grow up. I mean, she is shown in the movie getting her dad's heroin, like getting the needle and putting the heroin in the needle, like from the spoon and everything, and giving it to him. So like getting ready. But from her point of view, this is not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just part of their life. She doesn't know any different. And she's not upset about it. She's basically like, oh, daddy's going on vacation, and she knows he's going to like space out for a few hours and she has to like entertain herself. So the theme of this movie is almost kind of like how children can use their imaginations, arguably maybe even madness, to deal with situations that, particularly from an adult point of view, are horrific. So, and that's essentially what she does, because even though from our point of view, her life is horrible, she does not seem to see it that way, because she's so mired in her own fantasies that everything for her it's almost more like wonder, you know what I mean? Even things that are scary. So her and her dad end up going to this house that used to belong to Noah's mom. Now, Noah's mom has since passed away and the house has been abandoned. So they basically just kind of squat there. Now, they haven't been there very long before Noah, the dad, also ODs, and he basically dies in the chair in the front room. Now, it's arguable how long it is before. I mean, Jeliza Rose, as I said, she's very, very much fantasy. She's a very fantasy-prone child. Now, does she know that he is dead? I don't think she does know at first, because she's used to him just kind of spacing out for long periods of time because he's a heroin addict. And so at first she doesn't think anything unusual. I think at some point as he, like, this is horrible, but as he begins to decay, I think she does realize it, but she's so used to seeing everything through the framework of her imagination that she, like, recasts it as something, not necessarily something positive, but something that's not scary. Because I think the whole theme of this movie, like I said, and that's what I meant when I said that maybe critics that thought it was exploitative or lurid or whatever were seeing it from our point of view. Yes, from our point of view, everything that happens to her in her life is terrible. And it's, this terrible kind of shit. Her parents are terrible. They neglect her. The way they've raised her is horrific. But she does not see things that way because she has this whole framework of her imagination. And I think the whole point of the movie is that you were supposed to see things through her eyes and almost kind of like admire her resilience. And it's almost kind of, and I'm not sure if Terry Gilliam intended this or not, but I think, and I saw another analysis of the movie that said this as well, that said this might be that what he's implying is that sometimes madness might be preferable to the reality, if the reality is horrific enough. So it's like, even though, her life is awful, like from our point of view, since she doesn't see it that way, she sees everything with this kind of childlike sense of wonder, even though it's an invention. You could argue that maybe that makes her happier, that makes her strong. I kind of feel like that's where he was going with that. So her dad dies and basically just like sits in the chair. And then one day when she's out playing, I forgot to mention too that she has her only friends at first are she has these little little Barbie doll heads. She has like 4, I think there's 4 of them, and they're just the heads, and she has them like on her fingers sometimes. And she has different voices for every single one of them. And each one of them is sort of like a representation of part of her psyche, I guess. The one that she talks to the most is named Mystique. And Mystique is very sophisticated. And she has kind of like, even though Jeliza Rose herself has kind of like a Southern accent, Mystique has kind of like a very twee, like upper crust British accent. So we're led to believe that Mystique represents what she aspires to be. Like, she wants to be this sophisticated, lady, like royalty or a princess or something like that. And she has like other ones. There's one called Glitter Girl, and she has a couple other ones that represent other parts of her nature. Like one of them that's, very timid and very cowardly, which is kind of like, that's where she puts, when she gets afraid of something, she kind of can talk to that one and like say, oh, everything's going to be okay. So that's kind of how she deals with that situation. So she's out and about playing in the fields one day, and she sees this woman wearing what looks like mourning clothes, really. It's just kind of like this black, which I said, that also kind of reminded me a lot of the reflecting skin too. And at first she thinks this woman is a ghost, because like I said, she lives in this complete and utter fantasy world. But it turns out that this woman is not a ghost. This woman is her neighbor, who's this woman named Dell, and she's blind in one eye. And she's a little cranky, and she's really not too down with this kid, like poking around all the time. So through Dell, she meets Dell's brother, whose name is Dickens. Now, Dickens is a mentally challenged young man. I think he's supposed to be 20, 21, something like that. I don't know if he was born that way or because he explains that he had really bad epilepsy, and he has like scars on his head. So they said they did like an operation to try to make his epilepsy better, even though he still has it, but it's like it's improved. So I don't know if they're implying that they botched the surgery that they were doing, and that's what, you know, that's what made him the way he is, or if he was just like that to start with, but it doesn't really matter. So I think the most controversial part of this movie is the friendship that develops between her and Dickens, because it does shade into, I don't want to say a romantic relationship. And like I said, people are going, ew, because it's like like pedophilia and stuff. But as I said, you have to approach this as if you were looking at it from a child's point of view. They're both childlike. I mean, she is an actual child and he is a man who has the mentality of a child. And you know, they say, oh, I love you, and we're going to be husband and wife. And she makes a joke about being pregnant because, you know, this is sad, but it's like she's starting to run out of food at her house. And so her stomach is growling. And she's convinced now, because she kissed Dickens, that now she's pregnant and that's the baby inside. And, oh, it'll come tomorrow. But that's what I mean. So it's just kind of like she doesn't know how the world really works. So the relationship between them, even though it seems, like I said, from our point of view, it seems super creepy because he's, you know, twice her age or more, but it's just very innocent and nothing happens between them. Like they kiss each other, but that's about it. And she like, you know, makes pretend she wears like a little bridal dress and stuff like that. But it's stuff that like a little girl would think about someone her own age, because I don't think she realizes, because he acts like a child too. And he is also mired in his own fantasies, that I don't think she sees him as an older man. I think she kind of sees him as someone the same age as her, because he acts pretty much the same as she does. Because Dickens also, and his fantasy involves all of these wheat fields and everything being like an ocean. And he says he has a submarine, which he has named Lisa, which is actually just this old shed that he keeps all this stuff in. And he said, I'm a sea captain, and his goal in life is to defeat the monster shark. So he says one of his main things is he puts out bait for the monster shark. Now, the monster shark is actually the passenger train that goes by like every day. So he puts things on the tracks, which he calls bait, in the hopes of killing the monster shark. So like I said, you can see, as innocent as he is, you can see how his fantasies are going to be dangerous to other people, because at one point, and you figure this out later on, Jeliza Rose is, before she even meets Dickens, she's playing in this overturned bus that's all wrecked and everything, that's kind of by the train tracks. And you figure out later on that bus was like one of the pieces of bait that he put on the tracks to try to kill the monster shark, to try to derail the train. But he doesn't realize that that's what he's doing. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a fantasy world. He sees it as a monster shark, and he's trying to kill the shark, and he's going to be a hero. And so she kind of like gets involved in that fantasy with him. So they kind of like start sharing all their fantasies together. Now, eventually she figures out sort of that her dad is dead, because he's been sitting there rotting in the chair. And then this movie, like I said, this is one of those movies, like I said, if you've never seen a Terry Gilliam movie, or you're not really, and you watch this, you'd be like, what the fuck am I watching? Dell, the ghost / witch lady that lives next door, I guess she was either married or she was Noah's girlfriend, like way back in the day, before Jeliza Rose was born. Dell is also a taxidermist. She has taxidermied her own mother, and she sleeps upstairs. And so she decides she's going to taxidermy Noah as well. And there's this whole, and this kind of goes along with the whole like child fantasy thing, where Jeliza Rose can't really determine, I don't know if she can't determine between living people and dead people, or she's almost kind of like switched the concepts around in her mind because of a lot of stuff that her father told her, because her father was really into like bog bodies and stuff like that. So she kind of got an idea of these mummies, or, you know, people that had been dead but, you know, maybe they could come back someday. So I don't know if she has a complete grasp of the fact that her father is dead. And especially after Dell taxidermies him and they keep him in the house, and, you know, she puts like a wig and makeup on him and stuff like that. And so it's almost like he's still alive, and that kind of becomes part of her fantasy. So it kind of goes on like that. And then in the end, like I said, because of Dickens' fantasy about killing the monster shark, i.e. the passenger train, you know that probably something bad is going to happen at some point, because he keeps telling Jeliza Rose, I have this secret, I have this thing, and I have to show it to you. And then he shows it to her, and it's like a whole bunch of dynamite. And you know that he's going to put that on the train track at some point, and he's just talking about, it's going to be the end of the world, and it's going to kill the monster shark, and I'll be a hero, and all this other kind of stuff. And indeed, that is what ends up happening. He does actually end up derailing the train. They don't really say like how many people die or anything, but obviously it's this massive like conflagration, and there's like wounded people running around everywhere. And it's really creepy because like at the end, you're led to believe that probably Dickens dies and doesn't really see, because he has like a seizure, and then there's like a struggle with Dell in the house, and you know the mummy of the mom gets all fucked up and stuff, and so the little girl runs away. And then later on, when she sees the train derail and the huge fire, and she goes down there to look at it, her first instinct is to be happy, because she's like, oh my gosh, she's like, Dickens succeeded in he's a hero, he killed the monster shark. But then there's like a woman there, and she was a little bit injured in the accident, but she's okay. And then she sees Jeliza Rose, and she's, she assumes that the child was in the accident as well. And she's like, where are your parents? She's like, I don't know where they are, and stuff like that. So so at the end, you're led to assume that Jeliza Rose is going to be taken in by this woman. And maybe, I don't know if the implication is that she's going to have a normal life, because as I said, it's almost kind of like Terry Gilliam was saying, and I saw an interview with him earlier where he was talking about this movie. And he said that he's like, I don't really like when they portray, so much as like, children being like victims, or they're scared of everything. He's like, children are actually very strong, like much stronger than you think, and they're very resilient. And I think what he was trying to get at with this was that, as horrific as this little girl's life was, she was not unhappy or even all that damaged. She may have been, madness was definitely, a possibility, but he's perhaps making the argument that maybe that's better. Like maybe it's better for her to just vanish into, this fantasy that she's created for herself where she's happy, than have to look at the reality of her situation. And the fact that he's saying that maybe that's okay, like sometimes madness is preferable, I'm not really sure if people, that seems like he's very interested in madness and imagination. That comes out in a lot of his movies. As far as I know, this is the first time that he's actually done a movie like this from a child's perspective, though. So it, in a lot of ways, like I said, this reminded me a lot of The Reflecting Skin, but almost like the opposite of that. Because like I said, in The Reflecting Skin, that boy didn't understand the world either, and he had a whole fantasy, based mostly around the widow, Dolphin Blue being a vampire, but that ended up causing a lot of misery. Whereas this is almost kind of like the opposite, where it's like she doesn't really understand how the real world works either, or maybe she does, but she has decided that she's just going to construct this fantasy world around it so that everything will be wonderful and magical and everything like that, and she doesn't have to face, all of the shit that's going on around her. So in that way, this is a very, very strange movie. And like I said, there's some stuff in here that, particularly the relationship between her and Dickens, like I said, they don't do anything sexual really, but there is an implication that there's some kind of romantic relationship. But like I said, you have to imagine that even though he's older, he's mentally the same age as she is, and she perceives him as such. So it's like, it's very innocent. It's not done. I didn't find it, it's uncomfortable to watch, but I didn't find it like creepy or exploitative or anything like that, because I understood that I was seeing things the way a little girl would see them, and she doesn't see it. She doesn't really understand the implications, and neither does he. So there wasn't any kind of predatory anything like that. So I wasn't like creeped out or think it was exploitative or anything like that, so it didn't bother me. But if that sounds like it's going to be something that's going to bother you, and like I said, there's some pretty gruesome shit happens in this. Like I said, there's lots of drug addiction, you have little kid making up like heroin needles and giving them to the dad like it's no big thing. People get taxidermied and, people are rotting and things like that. So it's this kind of thing. It's very, like I said, it does have a lurid, is Southern Gothic kind of aspect to it. So much so that it's kind of over the top, but in a way it sort of has to be, because it's kind of showing this is how this little girl lives and this is why she's gone to such lengths to construct this fantasy to sort of keep from having to deal with it. Because why should a little kid have to deal with this? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like better that she's keeping herself happy by, just building this whole entire framework around her little doll heads and around this fantasy that she constructed. And, maybe that's better in some situations. But like I said, this is going to be one of those movies that people seem to either really, really love it or really, really, really hate it. So I'd be interested to know what you guys think about it. As I said, this is my first viewing of it. I really liked it. I didn't find it, like I said, offensive or anything like that. It's a bizarre ass movie for sure, but it's Terry Gilliam, so I was kind of expecting that. Not my favorite Terry Gilliam. I think that would probably be Time Bandits or maybe Brazil. But definitely if you are into Terry Gilliam and haven't seen this one, then definitely give it a watch. It did get, like I said, wildly divergent critic opinions on it. But I do kind of feel like, it came out in 2005. Maybe enough time has passed that we can give it a critical reassessment. But I do feel like if you're going to watch it, go into it not looking at things from an adult point of view. I kind of feel like I almost want to say this is kind of a little bit like maybe Pan's Labyrinth or City of Lost Children or something like that, where all of this horrific shit happens, but a kid is kind of like, that's kind of how they go to it, like how they deal with things. And so if you look at it put yourself into the mindset of an imaginative child, I think it will seem less creepy. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that I kind of got that that's what the vibe of it was. We're seeing everything from her perspective, even though it's normal. Like it's weird because there are a few like surreal, set pieces in this. There's some weird shit with the doll heads, and there's this one where like underwater, like, where the inside of the house is underwater and like the, Jeff Bridges' body is like floating around and stuff. So there's some like that, but mostly it's kind of played like realistic, but you're still, even though you're seeing things the way they would look in the real world, you're still seeing things through her eyes, like the way she's talking about things happening and what's going on and stuff, even if you're not always visually seeing it in the movie. So if that makes any sense. But if you go into the movie, just know that you have to see things from a little girl's perspective, and this is how a little girl with a lot of imagination who had a terrible life like this is how she is choosing to deal with it. This is how her brain chose to deal with it. And I think if you go into it with that mindset, it won't seem as uncomfortable maybe, because you'll kind of see what Terry Gilliam, where he was going with it. Because as I said, this is a completely independent production. He didn't have any studio interference or anything like that. It is based on a book, and as far as I haven't read the book, but I've heard it's a pretty faithful adaptation. I think that the book is actually much darker than the movie. The movie has a lot more like of a whimsical, there's a lot of Alice in Wonderland, references in there, to rabbit holes, and she reads Alice in Wonderland, at some stages of the movie. So it has much more of a whimsical tone to it, even though it is very dark. But as I said, some of it goes kind of like very lurid, like a Southern Gothic type of thing. But I've heard the book is much, much darker. I've heard the book is good though, so I might actually get around to reading it one of these days. And if I do that, I'll do a book review on it and I'll tell you how much it's different from the movie. But so this is also on Tubi at the moment for free. So if you're into Terry Gilliam and you haven't seen it, please go check it out and let me know what you thought about it, because this one, like I said, I love these like love it or hate it kind of movies, because they always engender like such interesting discussions. And if you hated it, then I totally understand that too. I'm not like saying, oh, you shouldn't hate it or or you didn't get it or whatever. I would never say that. So just if you did hate it, let me know. If you loved it, let me know. I'm really interested to see what kind of discussion this brings up. So yeah, that'll do it for this Flickers of Fear. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.